Hello everyone and welcome to the round glass review for the Sony 20mm f2.8, officially called the SEL 20f2.8. This lens was introduced in 2013 and as of July 2023 when I recorded this, is still available new at all the standard sources. The SEL 20f2.8 is a wide-angle APS-C lens, ideally for things like travel photography and street photography, as it's highly pocketable and compact. Now for your bottom line up front. This is a very small Pancake lens at 20.4mm long without the lens hood. For those of us in the US, by the way, that's not even an inch. On APS-C, this has a wide-ish angle of view that's ideal for travel photography, as the size makes it highly pocketable on cameras like the entry tier of Sony's APS-C bodies. Now that said, a good off-label use for this lens is on full frame, where, at different apertures, a slight crop from the 2:3 aspect ratio of full frame to either a 4:5 or a 5:7 will allow for more use of the lens's image circle at the cost of a little bit of periphery image quality. However, that's only the peripheries, and as a full-frame lens, this is a compelling performer when you slightly crop your images. And I think most of the images in this video were taken on full frame, and I think they back up that assertion. The focal length and AOV are 20mm and 70.6 on APS-C, and that's approximately, when you use this lens on full frame, 13mm and around 110 to 115 degrees, and that, by the way, factors in the vignette. The aperture range is 2.8 to 16, element and group count are 6 and 6. The design type is a wide-angle Pancake. That's the best I can do, and we'll talk a little bit more about the design in the diagram section. Filter size is 49mm. The closest focus is 0.2 meters, which in the US is approximately 2.62 toddler years, the time it takes a toddler to grow 0.2 meters. The drive type is autofocus with rear element internal focusing. The native mount is Sony E. Dimensions come in at 62.5mm by 20.4mm, and it weighs a very svelte 69 grams. My best tip is that this lens almost covers full frame. Here's a photo showing the full frame image with crop lines for 4:5 and 5:7 framing. If you can tolerate some corner and edge vignetting and softness, respectively, this lens is highly usable on full frame cameras with just a little bit of cropping. Next, this is a fantastic lens for small cameras, and if you're looking for something for your Nex or entry-tier Sony body, quite frankly, this lens will be impossible to beat. The next point is for videographers, and that's that the AF on this lens is silent. This is a great travel video lens, especially if you are concerned about weight. And lastly, this lens's aperture blades are designed to help ensure smooth out-of-focus area characteristics. Now, this is one of the reasons that I'm a fan of Sony and Zeiss for Sony lenses, by the way. This lens is no exception, and it works very well wide open, but it also delivers lovely image rendering to around f8. Stop down further, it still delivers, but much of the out-of-focus area nature is lost. Now, there is one exception to this point about out-of-focus areas being very pleasing, and that's when you have source point lights in a dark background. And later, when we look at the aperture star's characteristics, I think you'll get a good idea of what I mean by that. Alright, so we have a new section here for this, starting with this video. And I call this a low-level Seidel analysis, and we'll use this section to identify things like spherical aberration, coma, astigmatism, field curvature, and distortion. So if you're curious to gain more than the 101 level understanding that this video is going to provide, check out the handprint.com link in the reference section of this video's description. There's also one for Lonely Spec. I think both of those will give you a very, very good and detailed understanding about a lot of the material that goes into developing this new section. So this lens's out-of-focus area characteristics are generally neutral, though the source points that in them do exhibit onion ring patterns, and that shows that this lens has spherical elements. It also shows that those spherical elements were made using molded glass as opposed to ground glass. Now that's a standard practice, by the way, and we know that from the onion rings because the way that molded glass aspherical elements are made, the metal molds for them are put onto a lathe, and then the lathe makes the molds. Well, unless the lathe lines are then removed by manual sanding, they're going to remain when the elements are molded, and that's what leads to the onion ring characteristic in out-of-focus source points. So this first analytical shot shows the dot chart I use with the lens focused at infinity and the front of the lens very close to the screen. The cat eye shapes indicate that there is some mechanical vignetting of the image circle, and the straight cutoff on the top and bottom dots indicates that this is, at least in part, from the lens hood. I did not try this lens without the lens hood. I'm sorry about that. Taking a look at the same test chart in APS-C mode, the chart shows that wide open there will still be some cat's eye effect, and this will affect your out-of-focus area's characteristics. So let's take a look at the same chart, but in focus. We'll start with APS-C. The entire frame looks decent when viewed without cropping. Zooming in here to a 100-ish% crop at the center, the dot chart reveals some blue around the center dot, though it's nothing that would negatively impair real-world images. Zooming to 100%-ish in the bottom right will give us the best view of this zoom-in because of a slight screen camera misalignment on my part. Now here the aberration is a bit more pronounced, but again, nothing that would be a significant issue for real-world use. Now as for what causes that slight blue shift, my best guess right now is that it's a bit, and I mean a tiny bit, of coma mixed with some astigmatism and maybe a pinch of negative field distortion. And when we go to the full frame, we're going to find out if I'm right. So let's do that right now. We'll take a look now at the bottom right corner again, but this is a 100-ish% crop of the full frame area. This reveals that, well outside of the usable APS-C image area, this lens delivers a mix of coma and astigmatism, and that confirms that what we were seeing in the previous crops of that blue periphery stems from a mix of coma and astigmatism. Now one last image here. We're going to look at the APS-C crop of the Aperture Stars test photos, and this is wide open, and we're going to see the whole range of these a little bit later, but let's just take a look at f2.8 right now. This indicates a lot of source point smearing and some hints of Aperture Stars, but really it's just kind of smeary. The blurring is, insofar as I can tell, part of why Sony indicates that this lens has very good out-of-focus area characteristics. The blurry points have gradual light drop-off instead of defined perimeters, and that allows for a better blending of the blurry areas. This is a 6-in-6 lens, and half of the elements are aspherical. If you've looked at this video's sample images and noticed that there's no visible spherical aberration in any of them, well, this is why. Normally here I'd tell you what lens design family this comes from, but honestly I'm at a loss for this one. It doesn't look like, and nor should it be, a retro focus design because the focal length is longer than the register distance, and that's the best I've got. Breathing is as close to non-existent as any lens I've ever used. For any videographer who would be buying a lens in this price point, the performance will exceed your expectations and needs in this regard. Aperture is controlled on the camera in third stop increments. It has 7 blades with a circular profile across apertures. This does lead to 14-point aperture stars when you stop down. They become more clearly defined as the aperture closes. The front element is both stationary and non-rotating. Focus throw is fly-by-wire, and I believe that it's adjustable in camera settings, at least on some cameras. The focus ring is thin and not suited for a focusing gear, but the focus motor in the lens is silent and autofocus can be used with on-camera audio. Focus damping is not applicable because this lens has fly-by-wire manual focusing. Sharpness is absolutely exceptional, with fine details and images rendered clearly across the aperture range. Now that's primarily true of APS-C. With full-frame use outside of the APS-C area, sharpness remains exceptional until the peripheries of the image. Build quality is nice with a metal lens mount and a decent body build. Being a lens this small, the build quality is as expected. Were this lens 4 or 5 times its size and weight, I would have a different feeling on the build quality. The contrast is stunning, and the contrast and colors that stem from good contrast profiles are simply lovely to look at. Aperture stars are 14-pointed and appear in this lens a little bit when wide open, though they are fairly smeary at that point. As the lens stops down, stars become more defined in their quality and attractiveness to my eye, peak at f/22. Out-of-focus areas are nice wide open, but stop down, they become a bit generic, honestly. Source point lights, the bokeh balls as people call them, have the characteristic onion ring texture that comes from the aspherical elements being made of hot poured glass inside lathe milled aspherical lens molds. Also, when wide open, when at closest focus, blurry areas with deep depth behind the subject have a slightly swirly look about them that creates a bit of tunnel blur for subject isolation. Distortion is quite dramatic in the barrel direction on APS-C. I tried this test on full frame, but I don't have a graph paper sheet large enough to really capture it. I suspect that the results would not improve using a larger than designed image circle. In practical use, the barrel distortion could be noticeable for some uses, and in some of the photos in this video, if you look at vertical lines near the image peripheries, you may notice some of that barrel distortion. I tested light loss on a full frame camera, and I've overlaid onto that the APS-C frame indicator. Light loss is noticeable at all apertures in both formats. Though I said that, looking at the sample photos in this video, I can't say that at any point or in any image did that light loss take away from a photo. Flare and ghosting never manifested for me with this lens at all, and that could be in part, or maybe entirely, because I never took the front lens hood off. I honestly don't know what this lens looks like without it. So, as a tip, leave the hood on the lens for the best results in terms of flare and ghosting. Balance with cameras is great with both light and heavy cameras. I used this lens on the Nex 3, A5000, A6400, A7S2, and A7 IV, and honestly, it really felt great on all 5 of them. If you've been around this channel a bit, you'll have heard me say that many new or modern lenses are too large, too heavy, and that lens designers need to focus on making high-quality optics that can be carried easily. No better example I know of on the market today proves that this task is possible than the Sony 20mm f2.8. This lens has delivered some of the most captivating work I've created over the last year, with details so incredibly realistic they almost look fake. There are many, many photos in this video that still give me pause to look at them and think, I can't actually believe I took that. I think that's high praise, by the way. If there were anything I could change about this lens, it would be that the molds for the spherical elements could be polished to eliminate the onion ring out of focus point effect. I really, truly hate that look more than basically anything else that a lens could do. Now that said, stopping down this lens a bit does eliminate that problem, as does shooting in settings where bright lights aren't in the background. So if you, like me, loathe that look, just stop the lens down. There's a lot of good to be said, though, for a lens like this. But here's the best thing I can say. Sony, I want and would buy more lenses like this. Small, light, well-made, and with exceptional color, contrast, and sharpness, backed by nice out-of-focus areas wide open and stunning source point stars when stopped down. If that sounds like a lot to ask, yes, of course it is. But this lens proves that it can be done. You've set the bar high here, Sony, and now it's your job to meet or beat that bar again.